Welcome back, Hobby Maniacs. Rob Baer here today with our tips and tactics video on the new Death from the Skies Flyers book. Of course, this is the new hardcover version, 160-page hotness. Unlike the paperback $33 mess that came out a few years ago on Valentine's Day, this is coming out on Mother's Day. Woo! Well, no, I guess it came out like a week before, but either way, it's right about the same timetable-ish, I guess. But it's a good book. It's changing up Flyers, I feel like, and a lot of people had a lot of questions about this book, but that's what this tips and tactics video series is all about. It's basically breaking it down, showing you the new rules, giving you some ideas and pointers for how it will affect your games, and kind of, what's a video from Spiky Bits without going off on a few tangents here and there as well. So we do what we can, but sometimes we just gotta say things because it pops right in there, and I just gotta talk about it. I can't help it. I swear, I have no control. But it's a good video. I think this book is going to change up a lot of things. There was a time when Flyers were the boogeyman, and I'm not going to say we're going to see that again, but I'm going to say that when somebody says they're bringing Flyers, it's not really just a, oh, okay, no big deal kind of thing at this point. You're going to have to kind of think about it, and in your mind, like, now there's this new special rule called air superiority that now they automatically get +1 to the reserve roll. So it's like, ooh, do I want to just include a Flyer just to have a Flyer so they don't automatically get it? And then it kind of escalates from there. So there's a lot of things to consider now, I feel like, in 40K, especially when it comes to Flyer models. And it's just one more thing to hobby on, so there's nothing wrong with that, I feel like. So that's pretty much it. Let's just jump right into it and see what's new in the world of Flyers. What's up, Hobby Maniacs? Rob Baer here today with our tips and tricks videos on the new Death from the Skies supplement. Now, this is a new 160-page book that came out about a week ago, give or take, depending on when you're seeing this video, and that has changed up exactly how the Flyer rules work for Warhammer 40K and added an extra phase called the dogfight phase, which is all well and fine if you want to spend a few hours playing on the weekend with your buddies and such. But for competitive play and tournaments, we may not see the dogfight phase really come into play here. I don't know. I mean, as a tournament organizer myself, I feel like it's a little too much, so I'm probably not going to include it in my events. Haven't really seen how some of the other folks are going to roll it, but that's just kind of my gut feeling there. But let's, before I start going off on a big tangent there, let's get to the crux of the matter. Now, this is the video that usually follows. Sometimes there's one, sometimes there's two, depending on how much material we have to cover. That usually follows our first look review, which of course we put out right when the the material comes out the first time, usually about the same day or so, give or take. So the rules themselves begin on page 58, and this is basically the very first line, well, roughly, is saying it replaces the Burning from the Skies rules presented, the expanded rules for Flyers, which replace those from Warhammer 40K Flyers, Warhammer 40K, the rules. So if you grab your handy dandy 40K rulebook and it opened up to the Flyer section, which is on page 84 of the analog copy here, you can kind of see and follow along where some of the stuff is taken literally verbatim from the main rulebook. Some of it is kind of split up sentence structure wise, and then some of it is omitted, and some of it is actually, in the case of the new book, there's actually some areas that are added to, so it's really interesting to see kind of how it all kind of is starting to play. Now, first off, there's a couple of things to note. There's some new combat rules here. So you have attack Flyers, bombers, and fighters, and in the back of this book here, in the datasheet section, it is going to say what everything is. Like, for instance, here's the old DACA jet. It is a fighter. So the reason this comes into play here is because when you take a look at the wings, the combat wings right here, the Flyer wings rather, they all have a specific bonus given to a specific type of Flyer. And sometimes they're the same, where you can see, like right here, where it says any, but a lot of the times, the majority of them kind of split them up. And I'm sure that we're going to see these rules expanded upon by Forge World, because remember, the Aeronautical Imperialis or excuse me, the Imperial Armor Aeronautical. That was the game. That was the name of a game from years past. So Imperial Armor Aeronautical is actually 4 years old this summer. So there's a good chance that maybe we'll see a new second edition version of this book this summer that expands, gives us solid rules. Remember, there's stuff out there that doesn't even have official 40k rules yet, like the Xiphon Fighter, for instance, right? So maybe we'll get some expanded rules, basically based on these combat rules, but also some of the stuff that's Forge World only. For instance, the Vendetta, which is technically a Forge World upgrade, the Vulture, etc., etc., etc. So if I was a betting man, I would say that's coming out this summer. We'll know probably for sure, at Warhammer Fest when they drop all the teasers and things like that. But I would definitely put my money on that happening much sooner than much later, I feel like. So here is, we just talked about the combat roles right there. Then you have two new values, on each one here, where you've got pursuit and agility. And your pursuit values basically has to do with your movement linearly. Your agility has to do with your movement not so linearly, I guess, basically. And we'll explain that as we start to get over here, I feel like, right? So those are two new values on here. If you'll notice, a lot of the Imperial and Orc stuff is a pursuit of 3-ish, an agility of 1 to 2. Some of the stuff's a little bit quicker, like your Stormhawk is kind of middle of the road here. Your Xeno stuff, like your Orcs, are very on par to the Marine stuff. But then when you start getting to the shifty Eldars, those guys are ninja quick. The Tower about the same. Then you've got the agility of the Night Sight, strangely enough, is actually low, which you would think robots, they'd be a little bit quicker. But when it comes to Eldar, you got Booyah 5 right there. And you want to roll this or under when you're trying to do certain things, which we'll also get to here shortly. So Eldar, obviously, king of the flyers. Marines, Orcs, kind of on par with the Tau. Necrons, a little bit slower, I feel like. So that kind of gives you the idea where everything kind of sorts out. So for the most part, these sections here are pretty much all the same when it comes to how they work currently in 40k. However, there's this thing called air superiority right here, where basically it says that if one player has flyers in reserve at the end of the dogfight phase, which according to page 68, which you can flip to right here, the end of the dogfight phase, or the dogfight phase, basically happens at the start of the turn. So the dogfight phase takes place at the start of the game turn between flyers that are in reserve or ongoing reserve. If only one player has flyers in reserve, or neither player does, then a dogfight does not take place. All right, cool, fair enough. They also say here they can fight a dogfight if they both have flyers in reserve. They can fight a dogfight if they wish to. So these are almost optional to begin with, kind of what we were talking about, the whole competitive scene and the competitive format, right? So you got to keep that in mind as well. Now, flipping back to here, let's take a look at exactly how this is worded. So if only one player has flyers in reserve at the end of the dogfight phase, page 68, then they are said to have air superiority. A player with air superiority can choose to add or subtract 1 from the reserve rolls. Now note, it doesn't say just flyers right there, folks. It is all reserve rolls. That's all your ground pounders and everything like that, because you got air superiority. You basically, paved the way, and you almost have ground superiority at that point, it seems like, at least modern days, right? Reserve rolls, subtract or add 1 to your reserves rolls, and their opponent must subtract 1 from all theirs, right? So that is, wow, so you can add or subtract 1 to your reserve rolls, and their opponent must subtract 1 from all of their reserve rolls. So that's a very important rule to keep in mind, which is technically now part of the game. Rules is written in here relating to flyers. Now, something else that we need to take a look at is break turns. Break turns are a new mechanic for flyers. So basically, when you bring on your flyer, right, you have to go in a straight line, and you can kind of choose the vector. So sometimes people come in shallow at their board edge, and they come across like this, or they come in tight like this, and they're going to turn, and they're going to kind of, weave their way around the table in like 4 turns or so, because you can only make one 90-degree turn, at the start of your movement, right? Well, now this is saying that at any point, you move the flyer to the position, it will attempt a break turn and roll a dice. If the roll is equal to or less than the flyer's agility value, that's where your agility comes in here, then it succeeds and may make a break turn and then carry on with the rest of this move. On any other roll, the turn fails and it can only carry on in a straight line. So now you can come into your shallow angle, and then you can be like, yo, I'm going to try a break turn. And you can turn, and as long as you don't have, you remember, you got to go minimum 18 still, but you can turn and double back and get targets that are like trying to hide out right here from your 45-degree arc. Because a lot of times folks forget that 45 degrees for their forward fixed weapons, especially with the Heldrake nowadays, they're like, oh, well, let me just hit you like this. Like, here's my arc. No, that's a 90-degree arc. This is literally, look at that. You put four of those together, you have a pie. This is a 90-degree arc. So a lot of folks don't realize that this is a 45-degree arc. This is the arc of line of sight of your weapons on your flyer. So like if you're coming in like this and you want to get something right here, because the smart players are going to hide in this shallow spot right here, well, now they're going to be able to turn if they have a decent agility and get you good right there, because you can't come in sometimes too shallow with your 45-degree arc. You know what I'm saying? So these are some really interesting mechanics here. And now remember, there's that ability called Vector Dancer, as Juice likes to call it, Hold Me Closer, Tiny Dancer, that lets you turn at the end of your movement. So now you can move, break check, turn at the end of your movement, and you're button hooking people. So basically you can do a lap around the board in just 2 turns with these tricksy Eldar flyers, or with a really good roll on an Imperial flyer that has a decent agility but also has Vector Dancer, like I believe the Vulture gunship has Vector Dancer. So that's something to keep in mind here, I feel like, folks. This is a fundamental change to the way flyers work, and a lot of folks might not realize it, and it really can present some interesting tactical opportunities on the tabletop, I feel like, right? Okay, so that was the big thing there. Tank Shock's ramming doesn't really work. Skyfire mode's really interesting. So flyers with the fighter combat roll suffer a -1 penalty to the ballistic skill on the characteristics when targeting ground targets. So if you're technically a fighter now, you're -1 to ground targets. So it makes it a little bit tougher to shoot stuff. So that was interesting here. Then we've got, because remember, like in modern day warfare, you have attack ground. A lot of times you see the designation F/A for fighter attack, like the F/A-18, because technically it's a dual air superiority, ground superiority fighter, right? That's heavily adopted by the Navy currently of the U.S. So that kind of explains how all that works right there, if you relate it to modern life, I suppose. Hard to hit still works the same. Zoom and cover still works the same. Zoom and flat out. Now something a little different here, and it's not super tactical, but it's something to keep note of. You can always go flat out with a flyer if you don't want to shoot, right? You can go from 16 to, or excuse me, normally you could go 12 to 24, so you can move on up to 36 and then go another 12 to 24 in your flatting out, during the shooting phase, basically flatting out. Well, now you can add your pursuit value over here to your flat out over here. So for instance, something like a Heldrake, like they say here, you could go between 16 and 28 flat out. So, that's just something to keep in mind. It might not be as groundbreaking as some folks would like, but it is something to definitely consider, I feel like, in the future. Now, they do clarify flyers and measuring right here, which I feel like was pretty good. It doesn't seem to be very... actually, no, I think it's exactly the same, just glancing over at it. Flyers... Models embarked and disembarked in the flyer, in which, yeah, it looks like it's exactly the same as on page 84, which I never realized. This is actually not written poorly, to be quite honest. I'm surprised we've had so many problems with it in the past. So here's the flyer wings. And flyer wings are really interesting because there's a whole bunch of them, and then there's a quick reference back here at the end of the book as well to just kind of help you, so you don't have to flip through 6 pages when you're sitting there like, hey, which one am I gonna choose here, right? So flyer wings are basically a grouping of flyers within your current army list, okay? So you're not taking, don't think of it like a detachment or a formation of flyers. You have to choose your army just like you normally would per the rules in the main rule book, right? But then when you take your army list, you're like, I'm going to form a flyer wing of this flyer, of at least more than one flyer. And you're like, this flyer, and this flyer. And you're supposed to notate it on your army sheet, okay? So that kind of makes sense in that regard there. So each one has basically an upgraded sergeant, which is considered a wing leader, air quotes, you know, like red leader, like gold leader, such like that in the Star Wars movies. So, and they have a special ability that aren't right here. They're in a separate section, so we'll get to that here in a second. So each attack pattern therein, as long as you physically make this attack pattern on the tabletop, staying, you know, 2 to 6 inches away from each other, and of course it can be the mirror, or in the case of like this right here, they're not really going sideways. They can be, you know, linearly up or down, vertical or horizontal across the tabletop, or mirror image right here, like they say. Then it confers certain bonuses, which are really interesting, and they're broken up: attack, flyer, bomber, and fighter right here. Now, something to remember about this is that they have to be basically the same faction, or what was the one thing? So if they're in if they're in the same army, they basically, they can't be what is it? They can't be like come the apocalypse kind of allies. Like, they basically have to be of the same I want to say faction, but that's the wrong wording here, I feel like. Flyers can either operate as their own single models. Write down which flyer wings you'll be using on your army or your force roster. Flyers that are not part of the flyer wing are treated as normal units with a few exceptions and clarifications. I feel like it said something in here about factions, but it may not have. So that's really interesting. So remember, depending on what you're taking, some of these you have to be within 2 to 6. So you just basically can't be, come the apocalypse, putting stuff in these fighter wings. But I guess you could still be allies of convenience in a flyer wing still, from the looks of it. Rules is written here. I didn't make that note, but it just dawned on me just now. So that's definitely something to keep in mind there, I feel like. So first off, you got the vigilance attack pattern, which is just basically your leading, trailing right here. The attack flyer gets +1 ballistic skill against ground targets. In addition, add 1 to any saving throws when this vehicle jinx. Bombers get +1 strength to any bombs that they drop, and +1 to the saving throws when the jinx, and fighter is the same as attack flyer right there. Now, something we should talk about real quick are bonuses. Now, there's you can check page 8 of the main rule book, where basically it talks about pluses and minuses, and where you apply multipliers before you apply pluses. And then, of course, there's always just set values as well, and how that all plays in. So remember, you always do multipliers before you do plus and minuses, and then that will pretty much get you straight here. So in the case of strafing run, which reads you get +1 ballistic skill, you would apply +1 ballistic skill, +1 ballistic skill. But remember, you can't, even though you have a +1 or like a 1-up ballistic skill, or a ballistic skill of 6, basically, you still, to hit rolls of 1 and to wound rolls, or excuse me, to hit rolls in combat and in shooting, always fail, okay? And that's the one place in the rulebook that it actually says that. If you look up under 2 hit and for both combat and close combat, or attacks and close combat, it does say that. So even though you might have all the modifiers to seemingly automatically hit, you cannot. So keep that in mind too. All right, venomous attack pattern here. Attack flyers have the tank hunter special rule if the target is a ground target. So basically that's kind of cool. Same deal over here, but fighters, it's reversed to air target. Bombers, the reroll failed armor pen with bombs, and can choose to reroll a glancing hit in an attempt to instead get a penetrating hit, but the second result must be kept. The intolerance attack pattern, flyers have the ignore cover special rule as long as the target is a ground target. Bombers, same deal. but no restriction there on being a ground target. And for fighters, it's the same rule except for against air targets. Makes sense. The unmerciful attack pattern is 3 in a row, 2 to 4 inches away, so a little bit tighter. Attack flyers, in addition, double their pursuit value when they move flat out. That's interesting. In addition, they can make a shooting attack with up to 4 weapons when they have moved flat out. If they do so, all flyers must target the same enemy, which must be a ground target. The second flyer to attack the enemy unit adds 1 to its ballistic skill. The third flyer to attack the enemy unit 2 to its ballistic skill. So kind of like 3 going in a row, and then basically the third one saw where the bombs went, so it can hit probably a little bit better. A bomber, same deal there as well. But they can in addition, they can make a bombing run while making a flat-out move, as long as they did not drop bombs in the previous movement phase. So there's no restriction here. In addition, they can make shooting attacks with up 4 weapons if they moved flat out. So basically, you're not getting to shoot twice. You're just getting to shoot after you cover a lot of distance. So that's kind of interesting. And then it reduces the bomb scatter distance. Here, for fighters, it basically does the same thing if they move flat out against air targets. So makes a little bit of sense there. Now, the indomitable attack pattern is a combination of the vigilance attack pattern. The attack pattern receives the special rule it would normally receive for being in a vigilance attack pattern. In addition, all models in the flyer wing receive the special rules it would normally receive for being in the venomous attack pattern and an intolerance attack pattern, page 63. So this one's really interesting. It's kind of like it applies to any, and basically it's like 2 to 6 away here, 6 to 12 linearly, and then at an angle of 2 to 6 right there. So the intolerance gives you a lot of really interesting options. The ignore cover against both ground and air, and the venomous, I believe it was. Oh no, it was the vigilance. So that's the first one. Also gives you the +1 to your jink rolls for both, and +1 ballistic skill against either ground or air. So depending on what you're taking here in the indomitable, it's a stack of a lot of good rules right there. And then the omniscience attack pattern is 4 abreast, and this confers preferred enemy for the entire battle. So if you're bringing 4 flyers in, that's really cool because basically you can come on. Now, something else I didn't mention, you're like, wow, what are the chances of you getting 4 flyers on at once? Well, when you nominate this flyer wing at the beginning here, you write it up as normal in your army list, and then boom, you're like, hey, these 4 flyers are my flyer wing. You can actually roll for reserves for 1 roll for them. So it makes a lot of reserve mechanics, such as air superiority, really good, because if you're rolling a +1 to getting 4 flyers in one grouping, remember this isn't a detachment, this isn't a formation, this is drawn from your existing army as the prerequisite, and that's all, then this can be very powerful. So you start out like this, you get your preferred enemy, then you can switch over to any of those other formations like the indomitable the next turn. You would have to kind of cut it close coming in, but then you can just start straight just wrecking stuff going linearly across east to west across the tabletop from short edge to short edge. And then the fortitude attack pattern is also a really good one. It confers a 4-up invulnerable save and the it will not die special rule, and all the flyers have the interceptor special rule. So you can really get in quick. You can take over the middle of the table by about your third turn. You would be in this pattern in the middle of the table, something like this, because you would have had a turn already. Unless you're Eldar, you can literally be anywhere on the table, I suppose. And then you also have the interceptor special rule at that point. So really interesting stuff here, and very tactful as well. There was a time when the flyers were the king of the jungle and the ultimate boogeyman, and that time may return. Now, these are all the dogfighting special rules, and we don't have a whole lot of time left on this video, so I'm actually going to skip this whole dogfighting phase and get over to the wing leaders, because these are the special rules that can confer to your air sergeant, basically, in your attack wing, so to speak. So for a Valkyrie, each one is a D3, of course. So, and they're actually pretty good. I mean, I don't want to read through them all because there's literally like one for each faction here, but just be aware that there is indeed one for each faction, and some of them are very good, some of them are poor, but at the end of the day, free upgrades are free upgrades, right? For literally no points, you can't go wrong with that. Now, over to the Air Superiority Detachment. This is a detachment you can actually take as part of your army if you just want to take flyers now to get those wings and such like that. The command benefits are pick a wing leader from this detachment to be its commander. This commander is in reserve. You may re-roll the dice in the interception subphase. That's part of the dogfight. We didn't really talk about it yet. If you have air superiority, we did talk about that, and the commander is in reserve, you can add or subtract 2 from your reserve rolls instead of just the 1, and your opponent will subtract 2 from their reserve rolls as well. Very good. Combined formation, you can roll 1 dice for all the wings in this detachment to see if they arrive from reserve. If the roll is successful, then they all arrive. If it fails, none of them do. You can roll individually for each wing if you prefer. So kind of a give or take there, kind of depending on your tactics. And then if the transports in this detachment have hover, then they keep hover. If they can have the hover, then they would basically get objective secured, because you wouldn't really get objective secured if you're just taking them as flyers, so to speak here. So that's good on GW for realizing that that was the thing right there and that they needed to address it. So with these new rules in mind, we can definitely take a look here. Like Valkyries are pursuit of 1 and agility of 3. 3 seems to be about average. The Stormhawk 3 and 3, so that's, remember there's one that can double that, so you can get an extra 6 of movement and flat out if you wanted, or depending on what formation you were in, the fighter role of that, let's see, so this is just a fighter, so would you be able to flat out and still shoot? That is an interesting question. I actually want to know that myself here. Flat out and, let's see, fighter, yep, against an air target you could. Very cool. So Storm Talon Gunship. Now they added a little rule here that if your pursuit value, you can treat a zooming Storm Talon Gunship as having a pursuit value of 3 to 6. You choose when determining how far it moves when you flat out. So a little bit of a bonus there that might not have, some folks might not have noticed for no points cost. The Storm Raven is a 3-2. And the Storm Wing formation was included in here as well. The Strike Wing is a new one for this particular book. It's 2 Storm Hawk Interceptors, 2 Storm Talon Gunships, and this formation has 2 wing leaders. One must be a Storm Hawk, the other a Storm Talon. If desired, the wing can form 2 Vigilance attack patterns, one consisting of 2 Storm Hawk and the other of the 2 Storm Talons. As long as both pairs of flyers are in the appropriate attack pattern, then the Vigilance special rules are received by each pair no matter how far the pairs are from each other. The Flyer Wing can form any other attack patterns normally as well. So they just count as basically having that special rule. Oh, and another thing too for the Flyer Wings, you don't have to, like, they don't have to be within 4 inches of each other. You're not required to keep them, you know, if you're an attack wing, you're not technically a, what is the word, a unit of like 4 flyers. Like they can break off and do whatever they want. You're not restricted in that regard. At any point you can just basically fly away. But if you link back up and make that formation, you know, then you're good to go and you get those benefits. Storm Raven here, we've seen that. Storm Raven here, we've seen that. The Dark Talon actually is a pursuit of 3 and agility of 3, so it's very, very middle of the road for having, you know, concrete structures on the back of it there. And nothing new in the appendix. The Stormwolf stuff is flat, you know, it's fast in the pursuit, but the agility is very low, so you're not really going to turn this thing very easily, I feel like. And then the Forces of Chaos, well, the Helldrake is a pursuit too, but it's an agility 4. So this thing, you know, a lot of people talk mess about the Helldrake, but let me tell you what, this guy actually will catch some people slipping with his 45-degree angle, you know, Torrent of Death. Well, it's not really Torrent, but his Bow Flamer here in the near future. And then you get into the Xeno stuff, which of course, as you can imagine, super high pursuit and agilities here. Very cool to see. And same with the Hemlock Wraith Fighters. The agility on the Hemlock is only a 4, but it's a 5/5 on the Exarch. and the regular Hunter also is a 5.5. So that's super ninja quick. And then there's the Night Sights for 2, so kind of the reverse opposite of what we're seeing with some of the marine stuff there. And then the orc stuff, 3.2, it's comparable to marine stuff. Now the Wasbomb Blaster Jet has new entries in here. The Gigabuster turret, weapons with the Gigabuster turret have the Interceptor special rule, so that little turret on the back there actually gets Interceptor. Here's all the upgrades. You can take all sorts of stuff. Some of it pertains to things we've seen before, some of it is new. And then in the war gear section here on page 153, it is going to show you some of that new stuff, like the Smasher Gun, which is range 36, D6 plus 4, AP1 heavy 1, and you got to roll for that each time you shoot it, or the Teleporter, which are those cool things right here. Actually, no, that's the thing underneath it, the big Mega Blaster with the focusing kind of antenna crystal thing. It's an 18-inch range, strength 8, AP2, assault 1 blast, teleported. So on a roll of 6, on a wound roll of 6, the weapon now has insta-death, and on a 6 for an armor pen, it causes a penetrating hit no matter what the armor of the vehicle is. So you could theoretically, bust some stuff down, even if you could normally only glance at, i.e. against Land Raider, or I suppose an Aegis Strongpoint that normally is armor 15 there. And then the Tau stuff is, well, it's Tau stuff. They're kind of flyers, I guess. 2.2 and 3.3 on the fighter there. So, and then the appendix, and then that neat little chart back here of your attack pattern references. So that's pretty much it. I mean, that was a lot. We covered a lot of ground there, and it's 30 minutes. So you can tell sometimes these things take a lot of time and effort to basically get through. Plus, the extra time I put in making my notes for this particular video here. Generally, if you're seeing this, it's probably already been recorded and out for an hour or so over on our Patreon page and on the longwar.net. So consider becoming, a supporter of what we do here on one of those two platforms, because we always get the good stuff out to our folks that support us, because it takes so much time and effort to make these videos. So once again, thank you to everybody that has supported us, and please, if you enjoyed this video, consider supporting us here in the future. Spiking bits. Make sure you stay in the trenches. Help keep our channel ad-free by becoming a supporter over on Patreon, and also scoring yourself some free miniature swag in the process. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Check out our site, spikybits.com, for all the hot hobby tutorials, news, rumors on all your favorite hobby topics. And head on over to thelongwar.net. That's the home of the battle reports for exclusive content, early access videos, and more. Become a veteran of the Long War today.